Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Lost to Time. Lost to Time is a podcast brought to you by CAMP, the Contemporary Art Music Project, and it's a podcast where we explore composers, musicians, and other artists whose work has been lost to time. These are artists from marginalized groups who are underrepresented, underrated, and they deserve our ears and our attention. Today, you're joined by myself, Joshua Mallard, and co host.
Oh, you pointed at me. Hello, I am Han Hitchen. I'm the co-host of
Yeah.
Lost to Time with Joshua Mallard.
Yes. And of course, by the time you hear this, we're well into the holiday season. You probably heard or hearing this after Christmas. So happy holidays to everyone who's
Happy New
celebrating.
Year.
Yep. Happy New Year. That's coming up. Um, and, maybe if this is posted even after that, just happy everything. We hope you had a good time.
Yeah, be happy, y'all.
Yeah, eat some good food and have a good time. Hopefully, we can contribute to that. We are here with another episode. Before we jump in, we would like to tell you about some of the upcoming camp events. So, one of them is Project Goot, which is a virtual concert on Wednesday, December 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So this is a live event. You can find more info on it on contemporaryartmusicproject.org under the events area. So this is really cool. It's a collaboration between Camp, the Arts Council Korea, and there's four Korean composers, and they will be reimagining a traditional ritual exploring the meaning of life and death. Sounds really cool.
Oh, yes.
It has me thinking of our composer today, but we'll get into that. Anyways, Han, how about you tell us of some of the other stuff?
Sure. So I think the elephant in the room is we have Campground 22 coming up this year. That's going to be March 24th through 26th in the Tampa Bay area, specifically Tampa and St. Petersburg, Florida. And it's going to be their inaugural international music festival. It's just right around the corner. It's going to be a really good time.
Yes, lots of new music, great performing artists, and it's great to see this in Florida, especially in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area.
Yes.
Now, otherwise, there's definitely some other podcasts you should be tuning into. Of course, you have us two on Lost to Time, but you can hear Earshot with Logan Barrett and Tucker Johnson, where they explore the cutting edge of contemporary music. You can hear Zachary Hale on Play the Ink, where they discuss the relationship between composers and performers in interviews, so guest composers. And you can hear Diane on Musical Headwaters. Diane speaks with composers and learns about their creative process. And you will start to see some interviews on here. So we hope to be bringing you some guests. Maybe you've already heard some by the time this is posted.
Yes. Stay tuned.
Oh, let's tell you about what you could do to help support all of this. There's a GoFundMe page for camp, and we'd love for you to donate. Or if you can't donate, spreading the word definitely helps a lot. Arts thrives off of a support network of like minded individuals. We need support, and hopefully, the world keeps going around as long as artists support art and we can get more people interested in things like that.
Mm-hmm. Please donate.
Yes. But all that said, let's get into the composer today, Galina Ustvolskaya. Now, some of you may have heard of this composer, some of you not, but there's a lot to get into. And kind of like our Julius Eastman episode, there's a lot of really cool music from this composer, but a lot of mystery, mythos, and a lot of complications in the output. So hopefully we will get you into all of that. But that's kind of what we like to see, right? Like a
Yeah.
mystery. Personally, I think if there's a composer that you haven't heard and you find all this interesting information out of them and it's a bit of a rabbit hole, that should be a good reason to, start listening to their music, start programming their music because you found a hidden gem.
Absolutely.
You're probably wondering, what do we mean? But how about we tell you a little bit about that with starting with Ustvolskaya's bio.
Mm-hmm.
Right off the bat, there's some issues biographically documenting everything that went on. You're going to find that out as we continue, but Han, how about you take us right in?
Sure. So, just going right to the beginning, Galina Ustvolskaya was born in Petrograd, which is now known as St. Petersburg, Russia, in 1919. And she died actually in the same city in 2006. So, she lived a pretty long life.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yes, which is awesome. And according to Ustvolskaya, her father was a lawyer with a good education, and he was also the son of an Orthodox priest, while her mother was a school teacher from a noble, respected family, but a poor family. So they were not really wealthy. And she had one sibling who was her twin sister.
Interesting. So, we start to see trends between the composers here, and this is one where, you know, it's hard to find mention of anyone musical in the family.
Hmm.
Um, Ustvolskaya is like, you know, going into music seemingly like alone. But that's really interesting. There's probably a whole social political playing into this. Like how does a woman composer end up studying music during this time? We'll touch a bit on that later, but I just wanted to point that out because hopefully, as you go through these episodes, you start to learn some things about how people from marginalized groups end up doing music.
Yeah, definitely really important. So, speaking of getting into music, in 1926, she started attending the Leningrad College Choral College, excuse me. So, not only was she a composer, she was also a cellist for a while. And then from 1937 to 39, she actually studied at the Professional School of Music, which is the college attached to the Leningrad Conservatory. And after that, she started studying at the actual Leningrad Conservatory. And here she studied with Shostakovich and Steinberg at that conservatory. She studied there up until when World War II hit, actually, and her education was put on pause, where she had to serve at a military hospital. And this was potentially due to the Leningrad blockade or the siege of Leningrad, excuse me. And this part of her bio is understandably a bit hazy and fuzzy.
Yes, a world war will do that. This was a kind of a turbulent time, and I guess really some context that we should acknowledge when talking about her bio is this is Soviet Union, Russia. So there's a lot of stuff going on here when you sort of read in between the lines. Like you can't just take the bio at face value, and it's part of the reason why there's so much mystery. What we mean by that is like first we're talking about all this education and stuff, but the music activity during that time is potentially being like censored, musical styles restricted, and then a full blockade, things like that are going to derail your education. So during all this time, Ustvolskaya is still composing a lot, but there's like some issues underneath the surface. We thought that'd be a cool thing to sort of like keep in mind when we talk about things like literally World War II happening during her lifetime, being a woman in St. Petersburg. This is all like really significant information if you like sort of contextualize it. And then a lot of music straight up censored,
Oh, yes.
musical style, all that stuff. So anything you read about her output during this time could potentially be kind of like, skewed or biased depending on where you read it from, things like that. And she herself had a lot of opinions on how things should be presented, but let's not spoil too much.
Hmm.
After this blockade, it's kind of like a mix up of what happened, but at some point she was dismissed from the conservatory, so her studies came to an end. She was apparently accused of formalism. Now, I mean, I don't know exactly what that means, but in the context of like, everyone having sort of a mandated aesthetic, this could be issues or this could be Ustvolskaya going into conflict with, the conservatory heads for her musical style, which does end up developing a really particular, really awesome musical
Oh,
style.
yes.
So maybe the government didn't like that. Maybe the conservatory didn't like that. There's no telling. I read some things like maybe she had like a neoclassical aesthetic during this time, things like that. Long story short, something didn't go right between her and admin,
Yeah,
and they dismissed her. After the war, she began teaching all the way from basically 1947 to 1975, so quite a while. Definitely composing during the time too, but this was at the Professional School of Music, so back where she was at earlier. During this time, she's teaching a lot of students. So you could say she's influential as an educator and as a composer, and is easily like a very influential composer coming out of Russia.
absolutely.
I think that's worth noting because, of course, it's outside of Russia. Most people haven't heard of her.
Yeah, I mean, that's really true. I mean, as 2 young composers in the US, she was not a composer who was very much integrated into our curriculum until recently.
Yep, and also in most curriculums, just not there.
Well, yeah.
But very good composer, which you'll hear when we talk about the music.
Yeah, so she was really active in the 40s and 50s. She composed a lot of vocal works and film scores, actually. But something that a lot of sources don't discuss is the censorship of her music during this time. So we kind of have to take descriptors and anecdotes of her style during this period with a grain of salt. We don't have a super clear defined view of how she was developing as a composer during this time, unfortunately.
Yeah, this was super serious stuff. Like if you were too experimental or outside of the, nationalist composition style that they wanted, very serious consequences could happen, like threatening of your life, your family's life, things like that. So, I mean, this is immense pressure to, you know, I mean, it change how you write as a composer, whether you
Yeah.
like it or not, unless you're just completely fearless.
Yeah.
But all that said, there's a lot of composing being done during this time, and there's a good variety of like instrumentations and stuff. And that's the key information to take away here. Like, factually, we know she was composing during this time. Though, as far as like descriptions of the music, descriptions of her style, this is all stuff that's kind of like a bit blurred, and understandably, because if they're going to force you to compose a certain way, it's going to be difficult. And, she was dismissed from her conservatory for some sort of like aesthetic reason as well. So there's definitely some rub there. And she was very much trying to kind of come into her own, develop her own style. And she was very adamant, at least in quotations from her, that like she, as by the time of her death, was composing music that no one else would compose. That was her own, and living or dead, stood on its own, separate from other composers. That's where we get into a bit of like the tea to be spilled about the issues of biography. Now, compared to other composers like Julius Eastman, Undine Smith Moore, they're facing like, racism. And then in the case of some of them, not they're part of two marginalized groups, being a woman and a person of color. In the US, what's that like in Russia? Being a woman in the Soviet Union, being a composer. This is difficult stuff. The biography itself is very hard to find information on.
Yeah, absolutely. Ustvolskaya actually made it a point that Olga Gladkova's, I apologize for the pronunciation, her biography on Ustvolskaya, which is titled Galina Ustvolskaya, Music as Obsession. And unfortunately, just as a note, it's not available in English. She notes that this is the only acceptable source of information regarding herself. So I think that's an important thing to note when we're talking about biographies of composers and composers saying, "Hey, that one about me, that one's good." That's something we need to take in.
But even then, this is why we said it's like a little bit of tea, because
Mhm.
other academics have critiqued this biography as being like, potentially inaccurate. And one thing to know is like, coming out of the Soviet Union, coming out of the World War II, all this stuff, a lot of Ustvolskaya's life has been like censored and stuff. And understandably, she might want to control a bit, not only how her biography is perceived, but her musical output.
Mhm.
So if you look at her catalog on her website, there's only 20, 21 pieces listed. This is not all the pieces she composed, but these are the pieces that she identifies with and approves of. So there's a disconnect there between, like, the pieces she composed and the pieces that she liked and that she felt like she composed of her full will, I guess.
Yeah.
But we might we might not know. It's like, a bit of a mystery. But yeah, some academics think that biography is biased and not comprehensive or objective. But of course, the word from Ustvolskaya herself is that, this is a trusted biography. So who do we believe? We're not the authorities on this topic.
Yeah, we're not like some kind of like council that's going to tell you what to do or how to interpret how composers want their biographies to be censored or not censored, you know? And I mean, I can relate to that. There are some things in my bio that a lot of people would want to know that I just don't want to put in there.
Yes, I mean, this reminds me quite a bit of, like, the Robert Kraft, Stephen Walsh thing, where Robert Kraft does a lot of biographical information on Stravinsky. So does Walsh. They both disagree on a lot of things. They had serious academic beef, apparently. Like, if you
Mhm.
there's like literal text, like, they couldn't DM back then, so they had to put it in their books.
Yeah.
But this kind of is something like that, where maybe Ustvolskaya wants to keep certain things out or develop a certain image. There's sort of this like mythos, and I don't mean like a Robert Johnson deal with the devil mythos. I mean more like, who is Ustvolskaya? What's she about? So there's a book or a dissertation titled "Demystifying Galina Ustvolskaya: Critical Examination and Performance Interpretation." How about you talk about this one, Han?
Absolutely. So this thesis is by Elena Nalimova. In this thesis, it says as follows that Ustvolskaya became known in the West as a reclusive, eccentric, and relentlessly original person, and a woman with a man's brain, the lady with a hammer who drove away admirers and slammed doors in the face of a TV documentary crew who denounced performers of her music and dismissed, as well as discouraged, any attempts at verbal interpretations of her works. Then later it says the composer herself was endowed with the title the uncompromising prophet of nonconformity, and later she was seen as an uncompromising artist who deliberately rebelled against the Soviet establishment, a lonely island in the ocean of the 20th century compositional trends, a self sufficient, relentlessly original, and stylistically isolated artist, a doctrinally, I apologize for that pronunciation, religious person with religiosity being a fundamental inspiration for her music.
That's a mouthful.
That was a mouthful. I apologize.
Now, about that, this is kind of more like, the lines are blurred now. So we have this text saying there's some sort of false narrative, and then we have Ustvolskaya saying, like, okay, they go off this bio, and then the paper that we got this information from is itself trying to, establish more factual information. By the way, we'll just include links to all these papers for the academics out there who might want to know, what is the discourse around this right now. That being said, there's some sort of thing that they're describing as like the myth, like a myth around her character, her personality, her demeanor, and her music. We have no idea what is correct, but we've tried to give you just the plain facts, and we're now giving you the disclaimer that there's more information out there, but it's a mix of, like, this debated information. That being said, there's one thing that's for certain, and that's misogyny was very much a thing and still is today.
Yeah.
And being a woman in Europe could mean a different thing from being, a woman in the US. We've been talking about a lot of American composers. What's it like all the way in Russia and the Soviet Union right now? There's a lot of problematic philosophy during the time, and there still is today, like this gender role oriented idea of like women can do that is useful is like X, Y, and Z, and it's almost always seen as like if you dig into it, basically what's useful to men, like
Mhm.
what's useful to society is deemed as what's useful to men. To talk a little bit about that, composition as an act was considered something like logical, scientific, masculine, and I mean, a lot of women in music are just not discussed because of this. Another thing is the philosophies of the time were that, like, basically women were like not original thinkers in the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying
It
this.
wasn't
This
even
is
va I mean, honestly, even at the time, that philosophy is not valid. It's never valid.
yeah. And with that in mind, a lot of people kind of just discredit women composers. A way to think about this is how often do you see Ustvolskaya, Fanny Mendelssohn, Clara Schumann, Nadia, and Lily Boulanger described as the greats, you know?
Yeah.
And to an extent, a lot of times they didn't get the attention of their music during their lifetime to a similar extent of other other composers, men composers.
Yes.
Yeah, Han, how about you talk a bit? Because I've been talking probably everyone's ear off.
No, absolutely. And yeah, it's really weird because these in this sort of setting of being a composer, a woman composer at this time, a lot of these composers were just seen as, the students of these male composers or inspired by these male composers, whether they were their students or even like, their spouses or sisters or whatever it may be, whatever the relationship was. It was always like these women composers were attached to other composers. I mean, you got Fanny Mendelssohn and Clara Schumann being, connected to Robert Schumann and Felix Mendelssohn, yes. Ustvolskaya being connected to her teacher and mentor, Shostakovich. I mean, it's kind of a thing where why can't we just, or Nadia Boulanger being credited for being a teacher of all these other composers as opposed to just a great composer on her own.
Yes, and this is not outdated. This is something that still happens today.
Hmm.
For example, if you look up anything about Ustvolskaya, you cannot find anyone who almost doesn't introduce her as Shostakovich's pupil.
Hmm.
She studied with Shostakovich, sure, but she developed her own style, and people can't seem to help but pair her with Shostakovich. And on that note, he is quoted as saying she like this is actually really a cool thing. Like, oh, she influenced me more than I influenced her. The student being the teacher. I mean, that's impressive. Now, I know Shostakovich is a popular composer, and that probably has a good amount to do with it. But it's important to not discuss Ustvolskaya as like, oh, this is the composer who's a student of another composer who is a man.
Yeah.
This is an original thinker.
Yeah. I mean, we can definitely make links to influences of people who are close to them. I mean, I don't think it's invalid to say, hey, yeah, they might have some similarities in their styles because, one was the teacher, one was the student, or one, they were a married couple or whatever the situation or relationship may be there. But just to introduce these female composers as, oh, the wife of so and so, the student of so and so, the teacher of so and so, it's like, why can't we just have so and so?
Yeah, and after you listen to her music, I mean, it's she's the one you want to talk about because it's unlike anything I've heard. And I mean, we're composers, Han and I. We listen to a lot of music. I'm not saying we have like the most seasoned ears in the world or anything, but like this is something that really stands out in an obvious way. That being said, this kind of comes back full circle. We talked about her music being censored, and just think about it. There's pieces she doesn't want to include in her catalog due to, the constraints of the time, being censored, being pressured. And then she's already composing against the grain, being a woman composer, establishing her own style, and constantly getting paired with Shostakovich and stuff. Like, we've discussed the biographical issues and the controversy and all that, but doesn't it make sense why someone in that position might want to control, how their output's viewed a little bit, how their biography's viewed a little bit, like they're literally coming out of like this this crazy time in history, in world history, while being oppressed, being a marginalized group. It's like, uh, when you look at it that way, it makes a lot more sense why there's issues on the biography and why Ustvolskaya is outright making a statement like, go to this source. Because even if it might not be entirely like objective, academic, factual, it's what the composer wanted, you know?
Yeah.
Now, all that said, that's up for you to decide. We're not going to make you do anything.
Yeah, just
Um,
take what we say and think about it for a minute.
Yes, but you have the information now, so go down that rabbit hole. Look into it. All that said, you can see a lot about how women are portrayed if you look into the context of this time. Honestly, it's not something we've moved on from yet, especially in academia.
Oh, yeah. I mean, today, not even just in academia, even in pop music, you'll see a lot of, music critics or biographers or whoever they may be writing up, their anecdotes on music by, female artists, by women composers, whoever it may be. And when they do this, they often use language that is really patronizing, condescending, infantilizing, and it's really unprofessional, especially when comparing it to artists of similar styles who are men. And this is just this is something I noticed when I was looking up reviews for an artist in one of my electronic music classes. It was like, well, hang on, how come this EDM artist gets like a really nice, professionally made review, but this other EDM artist who has a very similar style and is a woman gets all these like more patronizing descriptors of her music and gets, harsher criticism on her stuff. It's like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and to deal with that in the Soviet Union is hard.
And in 2020 America.
Yeah, and actually, that's even something too. Ustvolskaya lived all the way to 2006. Like, imagine just 1919 to 2006. Like, that's a long lifetime. And to see so much, in some ways, it's a long lifetime, but it kind of makes you realize, like, was this stuff really that long ago? Has the world really changed that much? Sure, we had like, significant changes in technology and all that, but like, how much social progress has been made? These are deeper questions, but maybe you can tune into like hardcore history or something and study up.
Yes.
That being said, let's get into the music. There's so much to talk about. And if you go to Ustvolskaya's website, you can just see like the list is kept to 20 or so works. And that's really what was approved by her and what, she would like the world to listen to, I guess. For this, we actually started with like an early work. A trend you'll notice is that like a lot of these works are premiered decades after their composition. We saw this with Scott Joplin. We've seen it with Undine Smith Moore. Um, in this case, it's not like racism that's stopping the pieces from being performed. It's literally like the censorship of the music itself. And then, of course, being a woman. So there's this, now we're getting a complex view of like the different social political environments during this time.
You can't see it, but I am nodding aggressively right now.
This one is Concerto for Piano, String Orchestra, and Timpani. It's composed in 1946. The premiere was in February 1964 in Leningrad. And I hope we're pronouncing that city right. All that said, this is dedicated to a pianist, Alexei Lubimov. And you can actually see the performance of the very same pianist just right on YouTube.
Yeah.
So this is really cool. You can see all that on YouTube. There's even a score video, so you can see the concert and the score video. And I think actually, maybe every piece we talk about has a score video somewhere.
Yeah.
But anyways, this is like an earlier one. So I think it's really good to start with this one and then see, how the style unfolds in some of Ustvolskaya's other approved work. Now, what you're wondering is who would like this? I think, generally speaking, if you're a fan of romantic music, modern music, you're going to like this. I think this has something for everyone.
Yeah, this is definitely a piece that I think can appeal to a wide variety of audiences.
Yeah, it one thing that'll strike you about Ustvolskaya's work in this one, but especially in the later ones, is how percussive it is. Like this is hard hitting pieces. There's a lot of still like lyrical moments in this, and I think it's something that you can really latch on to still. Like if you are, a fan of really melodic works, things like that. It's a piano concerto. Now, the piano itself is actually a really cool feature in her work because um, the way she uses it is, like I said, very a percussive way. I mean, to an extent, it's a percussion instrument. Um, so you get these like really big homophonic sections, these huge chords. This one still has like a lot of like linearity to it, a lot of melodic elements to it. So I think it's just really like I were to show someone the first Usvskaya piece, I would do this one.
Yeah, and I think it's a great pick. It has a lot of I mean, it's a piano concerto, so you're gonna expect me to say it has a lot of really great piano writing, which it does. Um,
String orchestra, though, that's worth noting, right?
yeah, it's piano and string orchestra, but I think that both the writing for the orchestra and the piano bounce off of each other really well, and I think overall as a full piece, it's just really captivating.
What I like too is there's like solo moments, like
Mhm.
no orchestra, just piano moments, and it kind of like puts you in a whole different space. I like to see that, and it's like kind of like patiently developed.
Yeah, the pacing of it is definitely I mean, it's as Joshua said, it's patient. But I think I really like pieces like that, and I don't see enough pieces like that personally, so I love it.
Well, to be clear, what I mean is like you'll get the aggressive stuff, like right in the beginning, you'll get the aggressive stuff, but then there's moments where things really settle down and you
Yeah.
have like a slow developing, kind of slow solo section.
Yeah, it's almost like a little stasis going on, and it's really, really nice.
Yeah, compared to her later works, it's not quite as like I mean, we said this was aggressive. It's not quite as aggressive as her later works. So the next one that is definitely like one of my favorites is Symphony Number Two. This one is is crazy.
It's a bop.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So what's cool about this one is it's for a reciter and a orchestra. It's like I wouldn't say it's a chamber orchestra necessarily, but it's a chamber orchestra.
Yeah.
Though Ustvolskaya might not like the term of like a chamberness to it because it is a very massive sounding piece.
Oh, yes. No, when I first heard this piece, I assumed it was a full, like, symphony orchestra going on, but it sounds like a very, very, very big piece, but when you look at videos of performances, you realize, "Oh, that's not as many performers as I expected."
Yeah, and this is the one we definitely want to talk a bit more about at length. First off, this is Symphony Number Two, and it's Symphony Number Two with the subtitle "True and Eternal Bliss." That'd be in English, but the text here for symphonies two, three, and four. There is a fifth symphony, but two, three, and four have the same, not the exact same text, but the same author of the text at least.
Yeah, Hermanus Contractus.
Yes. And this one is in the performance, it's pronounced in Russian. These are religious texts. Now, the role of religion in Ustvolskaya's work is a little like, debated. But I mean, what's cool about this piece is there's a video you can find called Ustvolskaya Scream into Space. If you search that on YouTube, there's like a, a really cool documentary. It's rare, to
Mhm.
see a publicly available documentary, and she's just talking about her music and going on, on adventures, interview stuff.
Yes, and this documentary, it's spoken in Russian, but there are English subtitles that we saw that were included.
Yes, and Symphony Number Two is talked about at length. And what's so cool is if you find the video, we'll keep it in the show notes of the performance of this symphony, you can see the original reciter, and in the documentary he's talking about, his experience with the piece, what he thinks about it. You can see the original conductor, members of the ensemble rehearsing. It's like literally an inside look into the piece.
Yeah, it's really, really awesome.
And in there where she composed it is just out. I don't know if it's in the middle of nowhere, but she like has the car parked off on the side of the road, and she's like, "This is where I would compose this piece."
Yes. And I think that's a really interesting place because I know a lot of people say, oh, yes, I went to this village and I rented an Airbnb, or I went out into the mountains in a cabin, or whatever it may be. All those are wonderful and valid. But to say, yeah, I pulled my car over on the side of the road to compose on the highway, I think that's just so interesting.
Wow, I mean, I need to level up. Where I'm recording this podcast right now is where I write my pieces in my office in my apartment.
Yep.
Though it is nice, I got the setup, but this isn't about me.
Yeah, this is yeah, what the heck, Josh? It's not the Joshua Mallard episode of Lost to Time.
Yeah, we'll do a spin-off series.
Yeah.
That being said, the whole scream into space thing, like the reciter plays such a central role in this. And what I like to say and what really gripped me is like, I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive to how the piece is, but I think it does demonstrate it. It's like when the reciter talks, you listen. The ensemble isn't playing. And the text is really like gripping. Like every time the reciter talks, they're saying like, oh Lord, they're crying, like they're trying to be heard. They're screaming into the void. We do enough of
Yes.
that,
Yep.
They're trying to be heard, and they're kind of like begging to the heavens to be heard. And it's like the reciter's got such a good voice for this. Like
Oh my gosh, yes.
it's just really good. Like, and then the music is like, it's heavy, like huge chords, really dissonant. It's like such a static, slow moving piece. I think it's like one you have to listen to.
Yeah, the orchestration is absolutely stunning. I mean, this is just a really, really, really captivating piece. I mean, if you're just looking for something new to listen to, please check this out. This piece is awesome.
It's not even a full size orchestra, but it sounds massive.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that's something worth noting. Like we don't just orchestrate pieces to sound big as composers all the time, but when someone does it differently, I think that's like a big thing to note.
Hmm.
But yeah, I really think the reciter plays such a good role into this. And I think even though it's really dissonant, like say you don't like dissonant music, you don't like, a lot of what comes out of like Western 20th century music, I think you'll still like this.
Yeah. It'd be very difficult not to like it.
I think it's so transparent, the programmatic element to it and what's going on, but also the reciter gives you something to follow the whole time. It's not like there's like, I don't know, it's not like a intricate, there's not intricate like lines going through the piece. It's really like these solid like figures, these block chords that
Hmm.
really hit.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really impactful piece. And I think that it would, religious or not, I think it would definitely sit with a listener for a while after the first time they hear it.
Oh yeah, we got derailed a little bit on the religious note. Even though it's a religious text, Ustvolskaya has said that it's not religious music, and maybe she's not like composing it with that intention, but it is spiritual. And by that she means she said she puts everything into her pieces, like her heart, her soul, all her work. It's like in a sense it becomes like a spiritual experience for her of composing it. But the reciter also says that you can put whatever you want into this piece emotionally, like what you want to get out of it. I mean, we're English speakers, we don't speak Russian, we don't understand the text, but you can definitely understand what's going on, and there's translation on her website.
Yes.
Listen to this one, and after you do, that documentary interview kind of thing is so cool. It's just like you see what it's like for the orchestra to rehearse, you see the reciter talk, you see Ustvolskaya talk about her music. It's just like this is the kind of stuff you want, especially with the issues of the biography. This is like one of the rare moments you can see someone. And I like looking for those because we saw that she lived all the way to 2006. That makes me think, oh, there's going to be interviews.
Oh yeah, and it's really awesome because we don't see unfortunately, we don't see that with a lot of composers on this show. And another note about the documentary, it's just on YouTube. You don't have to have like a Netflix subscription or anything like that, anything fancy. You could just watch it. It's up there. It's free. Just as long as you have internet and a device to watch YouTube on, you can watch it.
Yeah, this is one you don't want to miss out on. The next one we want to talk about is quite a bit different. Symphony Number Five, Amen.
Mhm.
So this one's really cool. The instrumentation. Well, first off, the whole timeline of these pieces. The first one we talked about, the concerto, was 1946.
Yeah.
Work two, 1979. We're going in sort of order. This one is in 1989, 1990, and it's for voice, oboe, trumpet, tuba, violin, and percussion.
Specifically, the percussionist is playing a wooden cube, not to be confused with a wood block, but a wooden cube.
So it's just like it's a big one.
It's like, yes, it's a cube.
Um, the text is another religious text. It's Lord's Prayer, and you can, depending on the performance, it might be pronounced in like Russian, English, or German. Um, Now this is one where you can kind of see her music sort of like actually get the attention it deserves because it was composed in 89, 1990, and performed in 1991 in New York. So this is like her music getting into the West a little bit. That being said, I think it should be in the West a lot more because outside of, Russia, a lot of people haven't heard of her music.
Yeah.
That being said, there's a recording online by Ensemble Continuum that you can find by Joel Sachs. The instrumentation for this is so cool, and the way it's handled is really cool.
Yeah, if you listen to this, I mean, when I first listened to it, I thought that the way that she orchestrated this was really, really interesting. And I can't think of a lot of other pieces that, handle this kind of instrumentation this way. I mean, can you, Josh?
No, it's such a sparse and patiently developed opening, and I think like it's just one of those examples where like the instrumentation is so apt, the choice of timbre is so apt. So I think that's really one of the things that's going to jump out at you. I say that because it still has like its own dissonant harmonic language, but you know maybe if some of the pieces we've talked about have challenged you as a listener, um, we like to point out some other elements of the piece that you can kind of get into. Um, we've covered a big. I mean, we went from ragtime to this,
Yeah.
so we want to tell you some other things about the pieces that you might really like. I have to say also the voice in this one is such a good use. It's like, reciting, but it's like I don't know, the way they mix the recording I heard, it's just so boomy and resonant. It works.
Oh yeah, it sounds really well done. Another thing I would like to just bring up is the orchestration in this piece is so interesting. Like each individual line is very simple. Like it might just be like straight quarter notes or whole notes, nothing super crazy, not a lot of repeating pitches, pretty stagnant. But just the way each instrument is treated and just the combination of that with all the other instruments is just so it's just really fascinating to me, and it creates these ways that these instruments are used in a way that I would not have thought to do.
Yeah, one of the things that stuck out to me is like the tuba.
Mhm.
Um, it's such a low instrument, and the use of it is consistently low in the piece, and it's really distant from the other instruments in that sense. So like you get these big low resonant sounds, and then like on top is like oboe, and you can like very easily follow the lines as Han said. Um, but it puts you in this whole space. There's something to be said about like the recording and the mixing and how that plays into it, but I think like this really captures its own sort of like sound world really well.
Oh, yeah, I think the sonic textures that are going on here are really, really captivating, and, when a lot of people talk about textural music, they think of I don't know what they think of. I'm not gonna say what,
I
but
don't
this
know.
is something that you would look at and you would be like, this is a like you would not think that with this combination of instruments, again, a voice, oboe, trumpet, tuba, violin, percussion, you would not think that the sounds that you might think as a composer, "Oh, well, that's a weird combination. I don't know what I'm gonna do with that." But if you are ever curious what a good way to orchestrate this kind of ensemble would be, please listen to this piece because Ustvolskaya just nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about timbre and texture in the context. We won't completely nerd out on you, but it's not sustained tones most of the piece. It's like a continuous unfolding rhythmic pattern. It keeps going, short durations, quarter notes and eighth notes, and the way it unfolds is what's truly interesting. It's almost like a unbroken, constantly going progression.
Yeah.
Um, and if you listen to Symphony Number Two before this, you'll kind of notice like that's something. It's like these blocks of sound that are unfolding, constantly happening. At regular intervals. These hitting aggressive things. And even though this one isn't as like intense and punchy and like really aggressive, there's still that element of like things are unfolding. You're trying, I mean, in the Symphony Number Two, it's kind of like the reciter's trying to be heard, trying to stop the music and speak out. This one is kind of like similar where the music is like it keeps going. In the in number two, it's like eternity, eternity, eternity. It's
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah, this one's a little similar in that, yeah.
We're getting a little lyrical, romanticizing it a bit, but
Well, we love these pieces so much. I mean, it's like, of course we're gonna, nerd out a little bit.
yeah, and this one it has a score video. We'll include that in the show notes. But score videos, if you read music, this is the easiest way to access it as a Western composer, like
Mhm.
seeing the score right in front of you. So I think this is really cool. All that said, Ustvolskaya is a great composer, like without a doubt.
Uh-huh.
And I think should be discussed in the context of great composers. The biggest thing is that her music went through such a like turbulent time being censored and stuff, and so we're lucky that she lived long enough to see her music come to fruition, getting these pieces performed. But we're at the start of like the show, like we talk about lost to time right after composers' deaths is where their music literally starts to fall off. Some pieces, it's very hard for them to sort of like survive after a composer passes. And, it's up to us to keep this stuff going. Especially in the West, Ustvolskaya has had a harder time getting her music out in the West, in the US in particular, stuff like that. So, it'd be cool to just see more performances. The Symphony Number Five was in New York. It'd be cool if we could go to New York sometime and, see it performed or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, the proof is also that some of these are not like huge ensembles. So these are works that can be performed with smaller forces.
Yeah, and the musical content itself is not incredibly difficult. Not saying that these are not like, big major works that professionals should be playing. They are. Professionals should be playing
Well,
these.
if you watch the documentary part, there's a part where she says like number two, Symphony Number Two is really hard to play.
Okay, well, not all the pieces are like that, Joshua.
She said like disappointingly bad about one performance or something. Yeah, that
We've
was
all
just a
been
funny
there.
moment. But yeah, like people can pick these up. University ensembles, community ensembles, stuff like that. That being said, the theme here is like the lost to time element is very much still happening. We need to keep this music going, but also the lost to time did happen. There's like, we're just lucky Ustvolskaya lived long enough to push her music out because there's a time where a lot of it was censored or controlled.
Yeah, definitely. And also living long enough to just kind of have a say over how her music is presented, what of her music is presented, as you said, Joshua, and just how her life is presented. I mean, we don't have a ton of details on her early life, and that might have been intentional, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's like it's in the Soviet Union. There's a whole war, things like that. But when you look at other great composers, um, people are ready to dig up information, and we'd like to see increased academic interest, finding manuscripts, getting more scores out there that are approved. I wouldn't want my music to be like my deleted scores or something off of Sibelius to be pulled up.
Oh, yeah, definitely not. Because a lot of composers, there may be a reason they don't want that music played anymore. Maybe it doesn't represent them anymore. Maybe if there was some kind of underlying message with that music that they don't agree with anymore or they find problematic now, maybe their views change. Or in this situation where it was censored and they were kind of forced to have their music portray something that maybe wasn't authentic to their actual beliefs at the time.
Yep. And at the very least, going forward, hopefully there's more performances of her work, but also people who are being like authentic um in their discussion of her work. Like discuss her, don't discuss Shostakovich.
Yeah, come on. We
Um,
talk about him enough.
yeah, what we should be doing as listeners, if you find a hidden gem, a composer that you haven't heard of, listen to their music. We hope this inspires you to go check out those pieces and many more. 20 pieces, you could get through those pretty quick. And as musicians, we should try and get this work performed. Um, don't wait for someone to hand you the score, like a director or something. Maybe let's get groups together and make this happen. I think there's even a festival of Ustvolskaya's work like dedicated to her. It'd be nice to see those, like especially in the U.S. where we are.
Mhm.
Just getting more of these names out here. Um, all that said, thank you for listening. Let's tell you a little bit again about upcoming camp activities that you do not want to miss out on. Like we said earlier, there's other podcasts you should tune into. 3 other podcasts. Definitely go give those a listen. There's also been these special edition piano talks. So definitely check those out. And otherwise, we have Campground coming up, Campground 22. Han, how about you take it away?
Yep, as I mentioned earlier, it's in late March, March 24th through 26th in 2022, if the Campground 22 was not evident enough. And that's going to be up in Tampa Bay, Florida. So, Tampa, Florida, and St. Petersburg, Florida. It's going to be a good weekend of performances by really awesome performers. So, please check it out.
Yes, and also the upcoming concert, December 29th. Check that out. It'll be a virtual one. You can find more info on that on the website. But the past concerts, there's links to those too if you want to stream them.
Yeah, they're really, really awesome. Seriously, go check those out.
Yeah, live music has been coming back, virtual concerts, all that stuff. I think it's really cool to see this happening. And we hope you give those a listen.
Wear a mask when you go to live events.
Yes, yes. Please donate, support the cause. We'd love to keep bringing Campground reoccurring to the St. Pete and Tampa area, but also, helps keep the podcast going, all the other things going.
Yeah, you definitely want to learn about more composers who may be getting lost to time. And if you find a composer that you think is lost to time that you would like us to do an episode on, feel free to give us recommendations. We're always happy to learn about new composers.
Yes, I think it's very easy to underestimate like how underrepresented some of these composers are. Even if you just step out of classical music, not just composers, but feel free to tell us about musicians and more. We'd
Yes.
love to hear about them. Um, Remember last time Scott Joplin
Hmm.
selling millions of copies and is completely slept on in many ways.
Yeah. We want to not sleep on these folks.
Yes. And of course, if they're lost to time, it stands to reason that we probably don't know about them and we could use your help. So feel free to comment. And thank you again for listening. All that said, we will see you next time.
Yes. Happy holidays and happy new year, y'all.
Yes. Party it up.
Not too hard, though.